What's up, everyone? We're doing effects processing on all of our individual sounds before we go to balance everything out. We've done some EQing and some dynamics processing, and now it's going to be time to do some saturation and adding some natural harmonics, and then putting the sounds into a space. That'll be especially fun with this kind of IDM synth track, especially since a lot of the synth tracks are really dry. Let's drop it in here in the kind of bridge section and see what we're working with. Start with the bass. Those are the compressors we did in the last video. So that sounds pretty cool. I think we're going to focus a little more on this bass track. You can see the EQ and compression channel strip stuff we were doing earlier, and now it's going to be time to maybe fold some of those up and add saturation. Saturation is kind of a general term for add a little sweetener. In other words, adding a little kind of analog modeled clipping is most common, whether it's saturation, like tape saturation from a device in Ableton like the saturator, or soft clip limiting, which is really popular for drums and the master channel in your groups. That's most commonly found in the glue compressor. Let's go ahead and check out some of that stuff. What saturation does, and again, we're just going to start with tape saturation, is it emulates traditional analog devices in the way that they would clip. In other words, when you drive them, by heating them up a little bit, it adds natural harmonics to the sound. In other words, adds kind of some musical energy that'll help like bass sounds cut through the mix. It'll also help drums feel a little more loud and punchy. Overall, just kind of increasing the general perceived loudness of the sound. Watch out though, because the more you drive into any sort of analog modeling device, the more it's distorting the sound. And it also can really suck the bass, like the sub bass, out of sounds and kind of make them sound gross if you're not careful. So let's pick up right where we left off here at this first drop, and we'll add a little saturation to the bass. I'm going to solo that. You can see this little line in the sand down here, if you will. See that little white line? Once we start crossing that with the drive by boosting it, that's where the real clipping begins. It's always adding coloration, but the real heavy coloration begins there. We would have an opportunity to put a limiter on it here too to make sure it never goes in the red no matter how hard we drive it. But usually I kind of don't like that, especially in this case where this bass already has a lot of harmonics. Let's pick back up there. Let's give it a little drive. That's nice. Now sometimes if you're not sure what you're hearing, you can just crank the drive way up and it'll really add a ton of coloration. Let's just listen to what it's going to be doing there. So you can hear how all those extra peaks in the spectrum really make the thing feel loud. If you're not sure what I mean by that, you can look at it in the spectrum. It's this device we were using in mixing earlier on the master channel. Here's no saturation. Already a lot of harmonics in there, but if we go ahead and give it some drive, probably a little bit more, and when we crank it way up, it really gets kind of intense. So that can be a lot of fun. They give you this output gain to kind of compensate. That way, if you do end up driving it a lot, without the soft clip limiter, you can turn it back down. So a common setting for lots of distortion is to slam it and then turn it down about the same amount, maybe a little less. Now in this case, again, I'm really feeling just a subtle bit of that analog clipping. There's other modes in here you can learn about. They might be a little more kind of sound design oriented in the saturator, but primarily we're really working just with little drive, watching that line in the sand, making sure we're not in the reds here by either soft clipping it or adjusting the output gain. Might even just turn that down a tiny bit. I'm going to go to a section where there's more bass energy. Let's listen to that in the mix. That's nice. That sound's got a ton of dynamics in it too. It's totally pumping like crazy because we have these sidechain compressors on here too. In fact, we have 3 of them in a row that are really making it pump big time. So that's a really wily dynamic sound. A cool thing to point out is that when you add saturation, you're not only adding natural harmonics, but it also naturally just works as compression, because the way clipping works is the more you drive the peaks over the threshold, in other words, heat up that tape deck, there's a finite limit to how loud it can get, and that's really the little line in the sand here. And so the more you drive over the top of that, you are in turn compressing it too. It's just taking those natural peaks that go over the top and spreading them out over the harmonic series, which is juicy. More about that in our sound design course at SLAM, though, for sure. Another thing that's worth considering on the note of it compressing is sometimes I'll take that saturator and I'll put it in front or to the left, like before my sidechain compressors. That way the sidechaining is actually also ducking the saturation. This workflow is going to get you more hard sidechain effect, because by saturating it after the sidechain, you're kind of recompressing it, which might not be that tasty. Let's check that out. Yeah, you can really hear that. So in that case, the expansion, like the side chaining that's happening, is happening after the saturator, so that thus preserving the pump that the side chain is evoking. Let's do another saturation technique that I really like. Let's head over here to our drum kit and go to our kick drum. I noticed in our mix, our kick drum sounds good, but could maybe use a little bit of warmth. It's pretty nice. It's got just some nice compression on it, nice slow attack compression, giving it a little more body. That's fun, a little more punch. I think I want to go ahead, in this case, I'm going to grab a different distortion device in Ableton. This is a little less common in mixing, because this sound is really pretty aggressive, but the overdrive is great for drums. This is like a filter for our distortion, and then there's that same drive knob you might recognize. If we listen to this by itself, all filtered like this, it's going to be pretty crunchy. Pretty hollow and crunchy, but if you move this way down here, let's just listen by turning the dry wet mix all the way up. That's kind of what we can add here. So that can be nice sounding. Now we can pull this back in the mix to preserve the original clarity. Ooh, a little more bump. Take that out to hear it without it. That's nice. A little bit of low frequency boost in there. We're really boosting up like 55 hertz right around there. That's really tasty. That's another cool way to use distortion and saturation. Another great way to add saturation, another great tool that I mentioned, and this is generally popular on the whole drum kit, is a device called the drum bus. Now for that one, I'm going to go to my drum breaks track, and I've got that rolling pretty hard over here. Let's loop this section. Listen to this guy. So we're going to go to this drum break section, and we're just going to grab that drum bus. This is a device in Live 10 or Live 11 that's really rad. It's kind of 3 different stages of coloration. You have some clipping, like the overdrive. You have a transient kind of shaper here in the crunch category, and then you have a boom that adds more bass. Cool thing about each of these is they're all kind of independent, and then they have an overall dry wet mix here. So we're on the breaks track. I'm going to turn these guys down. We'll start with some drive. That's nice. I like that. Got a built-in drive and some compression if we wanted to compress it too. I like the transients in there. I'm going to chill out on that. There's the crunch control. Built-in filter on the crunch. A little darker. I like it bright. Transients here. This is going to commit more energy to the peaks, or a little more energy to the tail part of the sound if you go to the left. You know, I think I got that little run. Let's see. Yeah, so this is more to the tail, and this is more to the peak. That's nice too. And as far as the boom is concerned, the way this works is a nice Nice little tip, you can figure out what key your bass is in or what key your song is in, and you can move this around to find the right key. Like if you know you're in E, you can just, shift click and adjust this right to the 43 hertz zone or 41 hertz, end up with a nice low E. Listen to that. That's so low. How about if we had it in A? Let's go to A. It's like 55. That's nice, huh? Now in this case, this is just for a little drum fill. I'm not going to use any of that. In fact, I'm going to use just a tiny bit of this crunch, just a tiny drive. And this leads me to my next little distortion technique. We're doing multiple in each video. This one is going to be all about, this last method I want to mention is that all these distortion devices have a dry-wet mix. So if you really like the sound of distortion, but you don't want to necessarily suck out the clarity or the transient punch of the sound, a really common thing to do is to just drive it really hard and then pull the dry-wet mix back, thus allowing the natural, clean, undistorted transient and bass, which usually get destroyed by a lot of distortion, to still pass through, and then you can use the mix to kind of blend in. So in this case, if we did this in parallel, we could just like go apeshit on this. And then we could pull it all the way back and then mix it into taste. So that's kind of like the wall of sound technique from like Phil Spector, rest in peace, just recently passed away. This is an idea of saying to create an environment larger than life, you stack things up in parallel. Now for me in this case with this drum breaks track, I'm actually really preferring the more gentle touch. A little more tight and punchy. I'm not so worried about preserving the bass or the transients there because it already sounds nice and tight. Nice. So on that note, I gotta mention, final technique here, as I said, putting things in parallel. I said, by pulling the dry-wet mix back. An even more advanced or kind of also classic technique for parallel processing is to build a distortion channel strip on a return track. Now in this case, I've got the overdrive and saturator following a high-pass EQ, and I've got my distortion slammed all the way up. So now my drum kit here, this is our main beat. Here's what it sounds like without that return E, which is parallel distortion, or in other words, New York compression. This is it without it. So nice low end. Ooh, that bass is really nice, especially with that overdrive we added. But now I can mix this in parallel. This would be the same as turning up the dry-wet mix a little bit on that drum bus, but this is doing the whole chain. You'll even notice that I have the glue compressor on the end of that chain, and in this case it's in soft clip mode. So the glue compressor is not only a compressor, kind of the left half of the device, but then it has this makeup gain that you can use to drive the signal into the soft clip circuit. This is another analog modeled clipping distortion thing we were talking about earlier in the video, but this is one of the best sounding for buses where you have high, low, and mid frequency, all sorts of stuff coming through the chain. We can listen to it by itself. Preserve some transient on there. Slow that down. Transient's pretty much brutalized here because of all the distortion earlier, but luckily we have an uncompressed dry signal over here. Here they are together. I'm applying a little bit of that New York compression to that drum breaks track. How about the bass? So now we have this whole parallel lane of super saturated, squashed, hyper-harmonic information with even soft clipping and everything else. No real bass. It's all being mixed in parallel on a return track. So there's some great distortion and saturation techniques. Overdrive, really edgy and toothy and sharp. That's why it's got a built-in filter. Saturator, nice and round and fat. The tape modeler, The drum bus, just classic for all different kinds of sounds, but especially drum grooves, like the entire drum kit. And then glue compressor in soft clip mode, and even putting it all in parallel. Those are all techniques we covered today. And up next, we'll put these sounds into a space, and we'll be finishing this thing off. All right.